Hey everyone, so I have a really cool tutorial where I'm going to show you how to build out this book review application using Next.js, Tailwind CSS. We're going to be using Shadcn for components. And then also we are not going to be using a traditional database like SQL or Postgres. We are going to be storing all the information that you see in this application in a headless CMS that's provided by Wix Studio, which by the way is a sponsor of this video. And I have done one other sponsor video with Wix in the past, which wasn't using the headless CMS, but is mainly using their editor, which I really liked a lot. Is really cool. But this one's going to focus on the headless CMS solution that they provide you, which basically is just like a database you can just store various collections in, which I happen to have two different collections for this application. I have books and I have reviews, and I'll kind of walk you through how this all works during the tutorial. But one of the selling points of a headless CMS that I really like is that you have a way to give your clients a login and they can come in and start modifying records themselves. And as they modify records in this nice user interface, those entries will update automatically. So for example, to kill a mockingbird, let's say a client wanted to come in and modify one of these things. I could just go ahead and put like a exclamation mark over here and then go ahead and save that. Now, if I just refresh this page, you'll see that the exclamation mark comes back. Another really good benefit of a headless CMS is that you don't have to worry about setting up a database. This is all managed for you, and you can just connect your application to it, and then you can start using the headless CMS provided by Wix Studio. I want to show some of the functionality that I have with this application. So basically, we have the ability to list out a bunch of books, and I can search over books. So if I wanted to search for like Pride and Prejudice, I can search and get that back. And I can also search for like the and get everything that starts with the. So some basic search functionality, which is always nice to have in an application like this. We can also add a book. So we can add a title. I can say like Ender's Game and the author, Orrin Scott Card. And then we can actually put a description, a awesome story about space and aliens. Okay, that's pretty cool. Let's just add that book in. And so now that book will be created, and then people can come along and actually add reviews to it. So for example, I can come down here and can say, okay, I really like this book. This was a really cool book. Go ahead and post that review. And then that shows up here. This is a really cool book, and other people can come through and kind of read my review and see my ratings of that book as well. And so right now this is a placeholder image because honestly, you don't want users just to be able to upload whatever images. You want to be able to curate them and make sure they're not uploading some bad images to your site, if you know what I mean. So inside of Wix, I can actually come in here and find the entry that that user just created. Here it is. And I can just add an image manually. So let's just go and find the Ender's Game image that I just downloaded. Here it is. And that'll show up in the Wix media library. So let's just go ahead and select that image and add it. And now if I go back and just refresh this page, you'll see that that image will pop up for us. So you can have administrators come in and use the Wix Studio editor to add in images once they've approved stuff. And then finally, we do have authentication set up with OAuth. So Wix has a built-in solution for OAuth, and you can see here I'm logged in. And after I leave a review, I can go up there to the review section and I can see all the reviews that I left on my book. So for example, if I didn't like this review, let's say I feel like I rated it too harshly, I can actually delete this review. And then now that's gone. And it's also deleted from the CMS collection that we have over here for the reviews. So here's another collection that has all the reviews here. So something that's really cool about the headless CMS built into Wix is that you can actually have relationships just like a normal like SQL database where you have one collection references other collections, and I can dive into that collection by simply sitting here and say open collection, and that'll take me to the reference collection. And then finally, let's just go ahead and log out and then log back in to show you that the OAuth is working. So I'll just go ahead and click login. That's going to direct me to the Wix login page where I can go ahead and say login with Google. And then I can just go ahead and click on my web dev Cody email, and that should redirect me and authenticate me to my app. So now we are logged in again. And that is basically an overview of the application that we're going to be building. I think there's a lot of good information in this tutorial, so stick around if you want to watch through it and learn more about building out applications with Next.js, and then also learning more about how a headless CMS works, because it is a term that you may have heard before but never got a chance to play around with. But now's your opportunity to see me play around with the Wix Studio headless CMS. All right, let's just go ahead and jump into it, and hope you guys enjoy. So the first thing we are going to do is we're going to go to wix.com and click on this Get Started button. And this is going to allow you to log in. I'm going to use my Google login real quick. Okay, and that's going to take you to your Wix dashboard. Now I have a couple of sites already created, but we want to make a new one. So up here at the top, click on Create New Site. And then I'm going to go ahead and just do it from a blank canvas. They do have a bunch of templates if you want to use like the Wix Studio editor and create a website inside of Wix yourself. but we just want to use the headless CMS in this tutorial. So let's just click on the Studio blank canvas. So this is the Wix Studio dashboard. Now, most of the features here we are not going to be using. You could build out an entire application using Wix Studio if you wanted to. Like, you don't have to go and code. You could actually just use their nice editor to do this stuff. But over here on the left, there is a CMS section, which we are going to click, and then we want to enable the CMS for our project. So just click on Add to Site, and that's going to set us up with the ability to use the headless CMS on our Next.js application that we're going to code up in a bit. So for those of you who don't know, let's talk about what a CMS is. So a content management system is kind of like a database that you don't have to maintain and manage yourself. So it allows you to create collections where you can add kind of like a table like you would in a database, but it's a collection. And then in Wix, you can add entries or items into that collection, either manually. You could have other people log in, like your clients could log into your CMS dashboard and add stuff in based on their user roles. Or you can actually have users using your application, like on your Next.js app. You can hook that into your headless CMS, and your app can upload stuff to your collection as well. So in our application, we are going to be doing a book review application. So one of the collections that we're probably going to need to add in would be a way to track reviews on a book. So there's different ways you could do this. You could create it with AI if you want that extra assistance for creating your collection, or you can start from scratch. Let's just try the AI one. I don't think I've tried this, so let's just check it out. And then we're going to call this books. And then we're going to describe like what would be in a books collection. So like, what are the properties on a book item? So I'm going to say a item which tracks a book, such as a title, etc., which will be used for reviews. Just go ahead and click next. And then that should use AI to help generate some suggestions and properties. So we get back a title, an author, an ISBN. I didn't think about that. So that's something that AI can help you with, is give you suggestions of what you could potentially add into your project, because that's something I didn't even think about. Genre and publication date. So in our case, let's just go ahead and keep all this. And then you can also have it generate some sample content for you. So let's just go ahead and let that happen. And we'll create that. And here's a table you can use to manually modify whatever records that you have in your collection. So you see you have a couple of examples. We have the Great Gatsby, Pride and Prejudice, The Catcher in the Rye, author, ISBN. So some good information to kind of start with a template, because now that we have this seed data in the collection made, I want to go ahead and just start building out our Next.js application and hooking in to this collection. And we'll probably add a couple of collections. And I also want to add in some OAuth later on, which Wix can provide. So you can actually hook OAuth into your application and then use OAuth to allow users to either write or read from these different collections, which will be really awesome. So let's just go ahead and go to my repositories over here. And I'm going to click on New. And we'll call this the Book Review. And then we'll make this public. We will just go ahead and make this MIT. And throughout this project, I will be doing small commits to this repo. So if you want to see how this project kind of evolved over time, you can do that and just kind of view the Git history. So let's click on this. And if you haven't cloned a repo before, just click on this, and then you can click on this copy. I'm using SSH keys, but if you don't have SSH keys set up, you can use HTTPS. All right, so now let's go to my editor. I'm going to go ahead and just say git clone, and I'm going to type in that URL, and that's going to clone down that repo. So I can just go ahead and CD into it. And then I'm going to open this up real quick. All right, so now our editor is set up. By the way, I'm using Cursor for my editor, but you can use VS Code as well. It's just a fork of VS Code. And now that we have this repo set up, we can basically set up a Next.js project. So I like using Next.js in all my applications. I just think it's a really good solution for building out full stack applications. Let's do an npx create next app, and I'll say at latest, and then dot. And that's going to go ahead and ask us a couple of questions. And I'm going to default all these. We want to use TypeScript, Tailwind, yes, yes, yes. Give this a little bit of time, and that should finish installing all of our node modules. Let's commit what we have. I would recommend, my professional recommendation is to always do small commits along the way. So let's just add everything. I'm going to say initial next setup. It just helps you stay more maintained and like be able to roll back quickly if something goes wrong in your code. But that's all committed up there. And if you go back to the repo and refresh, you will see that commit now on GitHub. So in all my tutorials, I like to assume that you are somewhat a beginner with React and Next.js. And so I'm going to try to walk you through the things I'm doing throughout this tutorial. We have a app directory, and the way Next.js works is a file-based router. So depending on the folder structure that you have, that is going to map to your different routes. So what I mean by that is I'm going to go ahead and just start up the application saying npm run dev, and then we can go to that URL here. So localhost 3000, we are now in our running Next.js application. And at the root level, so again, this is the route. When I say the route, this is like your URL. And if you were to add another route here, so like for example, /testing, that would map to a folder. If I were to make a folder here inside this app directory called testing, it would load up a page file like this. And we could simply just go over here, copy an existing page, and then we are just going to put like a testing text in here. Okay, so again, the directory structure is going to link back to the page that you're on. So if I go to this, it's going to load that page and it's going to show testing for us. Cool. So the reason I'm showing this is that we should probably have one called books, so that a user can go and view all the books that are currently in the system. And then in this page over here, we can say books, and we should probably be proper and give this an H1. And then inside the H1, we can just go ahead and make it a little bit larger. Again, I'm going to be using AI throughout this video to kind of just expedite the coding process, and I recommend you do that too. But I'll try not to overutilize it. I'll come back and kind of explain what it did for us. So we're just making this a little bit larger with text to XL, and then we're also making it bold. So this is Tailwind CSS. You basically style all your components and your elements using these atomic classes. And I would recommend taking some time to learn all these. They're not too hard to learn, but they are very nice and they map one-to-one very well with CSS properties. So what we're trying to do is we made this collection in Wix called books. And when this React route loads, it would be nice if we can grab all the books back and do something with them. So this is where we're going to bring in a library that we can hook into the Wix Headless CMS. Let's just go ahead and say npm install at wix/data, and then also at wix/SDK. Okay, that's going to install the necessary libraries that allows our next app to connect to our headless CMS. Okay, so now that that's installed, what do we need to do next? Well, we need to basically create a client that we can use to connect to Wix. So I'm going to make a folder here called lib. And inside of this lib folder, I'm going to go ahead and just say wix.ts. Now, one of the things we installed was the Wix SDK. So I'm going to go ahead and say import create client from the Wix SDK. And then I'm going to go ahead and just create the client right here for right now. So I'll say create client. So when we create a Wix client, you can actually pass in modules, and then we're going to import the items from Wix data. So I'll say from Wix data. That was another library we installed, and we're going to take that module and just put it in there. And what this allows us to do is later on in our code base, we can say client.items, and then we can access that module directly through our client, which will have like the authorization kind of set up for us. And then the second thing we need to do is add an auth, and then there's different strategies we can use. Now the strategy that we want to use in this application is going to be the OAuth strategy. So to get that set up, we need to pass it a client ID, which we can go ahead and add a .env file over here. Okay, .env. And then we're going to say Wix client ID is equal to, and then we're going to have to go back to the Wix dashboard and set up an OAuth app. So I'm on my Wix site over here. I'm going to go to settings. And on the setting page, if you just search for OAuth, you can go down to headless settings. And then we need to create a new OAuth client for our site. So let's create a new client, and we'll just call this Book Reviewer. And we'll create the OAuth app over here. Okay, and now we have a client ID that we can grab. So let's just go ahead and grab this client ID, and we'll add it in right here and save this. So in order to fetch the items from this collection, what we can do is just say const books is equal to await client. I'm going to import that. And then we're going to say items, because remember we installed that module. And then we can say query data items. And then for data collection ID, we can put that collection that we created over in the headless CMS. And I don't think there's any other things we want to use. Consistent read is something that you might want to look into. Basically, if you were to create an item in Wix, when you fetch it back, you might want to use consistent read of true. so that you can actually get that item back, because it is eventually consistent, for what I understand. And so using that flag will just read from the primary database to get back the information. It'll just take a little bit longer, I think. So let's just log out the books here and see if this will work. But let's just run it and see if we get back anything in the console over here. And you can see over here we got back some data. Okay, and so what we want to do is we're going to actually say .find, and we're going to say .then, and we're going to return, and then we're going to log out the response. Okay, so let's just save this, and then I'm going to refresh the page again. And you'll see that we actually get back all the book information. We have an items thing, and we get back all the books. And so all this stuff, we don't really want to expose to the UI right now. Like, we just really need the data. So I'm going to say res.items.map, and then we want to get back the data that's on that item. So if we were to console log books now, like this, we'll see all that book data from the seed data that was ingested into that collection show up here. All right, so now it's just a matter of like, can we like loop over this and display this? So I'm gonna go ahead and just make a div here, and we'll say class name, and we're gonna give it a grid. So in Tailwind CSS, you can use grids to basically display some data or some cards. So inside the grid, we can actually just loop over all the books. So I can say books.map, and then for every book that we find, we can simply just loop out some of the information that we saw over here in the terminal. So we have like _ID, we have ISBN title. So it would be nice if we just display like the title, and the author is probably good enough, and then also the ID. Now we are getting some TypeScript errors, so we could basically just make these potentially optional. But we should probably come back and actually type what's being returned here in a bit. Well, let's go back to the UI and make sure that those books show up. So they do. We see The Great Gatsby, To Kill a Mockingbird, Pride and Prejudice, and we can come back later and make this look a little bit nicer. Cool, so hopefully that was pretty apparent to you how easy it was to hook in to a CMS data source and get that data displayed in your Next.js application. I'm gonna go ahead and just commit what we have since we made some good changes. But before I accidentally commit that .env file, let's go and open up that gitignore. And then down here, I'm gonna say .env. I wanna ignore that .env file. And now we can just go ahead and say displaying books collection on books route. Go ahead and sync that up, and we are good. So I like to integrate in my tutorials early with a component library, just so that like what we're building looks nicer as we're building it out. So I'm going to bring in a component library called Shadcn, which I use in a lot of my projects. I highly recommend it. So let's go to Shadcn's installation guide. It's very easy to get set up in Next.js. You basically just run this command. So let's just run npx shadcn latest init, and I'll say yes, and I'll just use the defaults. And now that you set that up, you can actually install individual components by running commands like this. So if you go and look at all the components that Shadcn provides you, each one of them has to be installed individually. And that is just so you don't have a bunch of random stuff installed that you might not need. So we always need a button. So let's just install a button here. Let's run that in the terminal. And if this successfully installs, what you can do is down here, you can just go ahead and say button and then import it from that components directory. And I'll just go ahead and say add book. Now to point out what happens when you run that command, there's a components directory that gets created. And inside of here, we have a UI folder that has the button. So what I like about Shadcn a lot is that you have control over this component and you can modify it as you need for your project versus a lot of other component libraries. Like they've abstracted away all that, and it's just a little bit more difficult to get and customize those components as needed. So now that we see the button showing up at the bottom, we know that Shadcn is correctly set up. So for the next steps, I would like to actually make all this information be in cards. So if you go back to Shadcn, we have a card component that we could bring in. Let's just go ahead and click on the card component, and then we can scroll down and it's going to tell us how to install it. It's the same command that we ran earlier for the button, but now we do it for a card. So that's going to install the card component inside of this UI directory. And we can just follow the usage guide. So let's first start with importing all these things from the correct directory. Okay. And then down here, this is how you can display a card. So I'll grab all this. And then instead of mapping over all the books and just doing like whatever we did before with the divs, we're going to paste in the card information. And we can just kind of move over the stuff that we need to. So the key should live on the card. The title should probably be in place of this card title. And the author should probably be, I don't know, we can put it here for right now. And then we'll look at this and just see how it kind of looks. And we'll go back to the app, and here it is. So already our app is looking a little bit cleaner. So one thing we could do is, as a user, if I need to find an existing book, it'd be nice if I can come into a book that someone already uploaded, and then I could just add a review to that book specifically. So instead of card footer here, let's just go and add a button, and we could just say like read reviews or something like that. And now we have a read reviews button that when they click it, we should probably have them navigate to a new route. Okay, let's just go ahead and wrap this whole thing in a link. I'll say link, and then we will wrap that. And when you're using Shadcn, something that's very important is that you can say as child, and that's basically going to take the styles of the button and it applies it to the child over here. So we have like a link child, and we're going to apply the styles of the button to the link. And then inside of here, we can just add an href so that when a user clicks on the button, they're going to redirect to a books/book ID URL. Now, if we were to click this, it's not going to work because we don't have this page, but it did redirect us to a page. And so we could basically make a new Next.js route to accept this ID and use it. So how do you do that? Well, inside of the books folder we already have, make a new folder called book ID. And then inside of that, we're going to say page.tsx. And we are going to copy this existing books page. And then we're just going to delete a lot of the stuff that's in it. Okay, we'll call this book page. We'll delete all the card stuff. We don't need it right now. And then also, we'll comment this out for just right now. And let's just make sure this works. So we're going to go back to the app, and it does now load a route. Pretty cool. And we can navigate back and forward between these pages. So when this page loads, it would be good to fetch the individual information from the Wix CMS to get the title, the author, and whatever else and display it on this page. So we already have the information of how to like fetch a collection item, but we also have to kind of change it a little bit so we just get one item instead of fetching back like everything in the collection. So let's delete everything. I'm going to say .get data item. And let's look at what this takes in. This takes in a data item ID. So we need to get the book ID, which we don't have yet. So how do you get the book ID that we kind of put here in the brackets, which I didn't really talk about? The brackets allow you to specify a variable, which will get passed in to your React server components inside the props here. And Cursor's kind of telling us how we can get that. And so we'll get a params with a book ID. And we can simply just say params.bookid like this. And this is how we can fetch the book from Wix. I don't think there's anything else we have to do here yet. We'll get the data back. So we could potentially just say data, and then we could change that to bbook. Okay. And then we could just log the book title out here. So I'm going to say book.title. And I think also what we need to do is we'll have to put in a data collection ID like we did before. So that's going to be a second argument here. You pass in a data collection ID of books, and now everything should come back and it says The Great Gatsby. Okay, so as we navigate between books, we actually get the title from Wix's CMS, and that gets displayed. So some other things we should probably do is like, let's display the author of the book. There we go. And then we could also display a description, which I don't think these things have descriptions on them. So let's go back to here. And yeah, there's no description. We have genre, which we could probably display. And we might want to come back and add a description so we can get like a quick little overview of what this book is about. So let's just change this to genre. So it says classic. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to grab all these titles and I'm going to go to ChatGPT. I'm going to say, write me a quick description for all these books. And I'll just go ahead and paste in those books. Again, if you can utilize AI into your workflow, like you're just going to become so much more productive. So I like to incorporate those into my tutorials if possible. So as these things are printing out, it's simple of just going over here and we're going to add a new field. We haven't done a manual addition of a field in Wix, but you can do that. Click add new field. And then I'm going to add a text and I'll click choose field type and I'll call it description. And then we'll click save, but you can also add like validations to make a field required. You can limit how many characters can be in that field. So for description, I think maybe I don't know, 1,000 characters max might be pretty good. And then also a min of 50. Like you want people to actually describe the book a little bit good. And you can also default it to a value if you want to. I'm just going to click save. And now we have a bunch of fields that are getting warnings because they don't have descriptions. So let's just go ahead and paste all those in. This won't take us too long to do. I'm going to go ahead and grab this one. All right, so we added all those items and those should auto-save as we paste them in. So now if we go back to our UI, if we wanted to display the description, it's as simple as just going and adding another book description like this. And then we should see those descriptions pop up. So again, that's the beauty of a CMS is typically you have like this nice user interface that you and your non-technical users can come in and change values. And then those will automatically just update in your UI when a user hits your endpoints. Okay, so right now this book page doesn't look too great. I mean, the information is displayed, but it just doesn't look appealing to the eye. And some things I would recommend checking out are there are many AI tools available, such as V0 is one I like to use as well, or just in Cursor itself, you can ask Cursor to restyle this page and make it look a little nicer. So let's just try out V0. I like to expose you guys to some new tools that really help you become productive. So I'm going to say, make me a single page for displaying book information and some reviews that users can post. Now, one thing I like about V0 is that it's going to give us code that works with Next.js and Shadcn. And so everything that we see here that's being generated, it's basically just a Shadcn install and everything will just work out. So for example, here are some reviews and like we can actually grab this review section in a little bit, but we just want to start with the first one. So let's just grab the book page. And if you look at it, it's literally using the same card components that we used earlier. So if we just copy this and overwrite this section here, all right, and then we can just go ahead and make sure we import the cards. So we'll go up and import all the card information right there. And then we'll just have to fix a little bit of different places where like stuff needs to be defined. All right, so let's go back and check out our app. Here it is. It's getting pushed off the top a little bit. And so what we'll want to do is we'll have to dive into the tailwind, and I'm going to delete all this. I don't think we want all that pre-generated tailwind. We just want to do the default. So there's a couple things that we can improve with this page. For example, it's already squeezed to the top of the page. We could wrap this whole thing in a container, and we can say MX auto, and then I can give it a padding Y of 12 or something. And that'll push it to the center. So already it's looking pretty good. An image, that's something that we could also add to our CMS. So if we were to go back to Wix, I can actually add a new field. So if you look at the Wix CMS, you have the ability to do URLs. So if you wanted a user to be able to upload a URL to a book, you could do that. Wix also has a media gallery. So like if you wanted to use the existing media gallery in Wix, you can just have images referenced from that in your data collections, or you can upload an image directly. Now, depending on the needs of your project, I would recommend that you don't let users just upload URLs to whatever images online, because users are mean. They can upload some pretty bad images that you do not want displayed for all your users, because imagine if they go to a not safe for work site, they grab a URL to an image that you don't want on your book review site. That's possible. So that's something that you may want to have control over from an admin. So we are going to do an image here, and let's just choose that as a field type. And yeah, we could call it image, and we'll say save. So I Googled The Great Gatsby and I downloaded that image. Let's go back to Wix, and we are going to just upload that directly from our computer. I can go to upload media. Let's click on that, and I will upload from my computer, and we'll find The Great Gatsby over here. Here's the image, and I'll go ahead and just add it. And now we should be able to basically use that image property inside our application. So there's a couple things we need to change here. First of all, this is complaining because we're not using next image. Next image is an optimized component where basically any URL that it sees, it's going to download that image, and your next app is going to use the Sharp library, which is like an image manipulation library, to scale down that image so that you reduce your bandwidth usage and your users can get images that load very fast. Let's do the width and the height of 200 and 400, and then we'll just say image here. So what should happen now is if you go back to localhost, So if you look at the UI, you'll see that we're getting this weird fetch error because the URL that Wix sends back is like an internal representation of the reference to the image. So let's go ahead and just write a really quick helper function. Basically, I'm going to say convert Wix image to URL. And what we need to do is we're going to take in the Wix image URL here, and we need to actually just append this. So I'm going to go ahead and just do this. And so this is basically taking that URL with like that interesting Wix prefix, and it's splitting it to get this information right here. So it's just getting this. And so we're using that information to append onto a static Wix static.com/media. And then we can just go down here and use that. So if I were to call that function and use it there, that image should now display on our UI. So let's go back. And now this is failing because Next.js has a security thing in place where you can't just download random images from the internet. That has to be explicitly added to the next config. So let's go over here. I'm going to add images. And then we want to add in a remote patterns like this, and we can just add the static Wix site to allow that image to be fetched. So let's just go ahead and refresh the page real quick. And now we get the full image. Very nice. So some changes I would do is this image is obviously huge. So let's scale it down a little bit. So instead of this being W full, we're going to say W of 200 pixels, height of 400 pixels like this, kind of matching what is in this next image props. And then we'll see how this looks. Let's save this and go back. Here is the book. I'll probably scale it a little bit to keep the resolution good. We'll do like 300 there. Okay. And then I think it'd be cool if the information was actually over here. Now we could simply just, in the card content, we could add a div. And this is where learning Tailwind CSS will come into play. We'll say class name, and we want to give this a flex. We want to give this a gap of 4. And then if we were to wrap all this in a div, those should be side by side now. Pretty cool. A couple of small tweaks. I want to make this a little larger. So the Great Gatsby could be here. We can say class name. And yeah, we can make this a little larger. Here we go. And the image could also be scaled down just a bit. I think it's a little large. So we'll do like 200 by 300. Just so it's not as large. Okay, so there's our book. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now if we were to go back to the home page, remember that we're not displaying the book image here. So I think in the actual card itself, we should probably display that if we have an image. And I think this would actually be better if it's put inside the Wix file over here, so we can import it from different modules. So I'll just export, and then we're going to export that function from this file. And then we can actually just import it from that shared location. Okay. And then let's go back to our main page, and we're going to display that same image. So what we need to do is we're going to grab that same image component that we did, and inside the card content, we are going to put the full image right there. Let's just import some things. Make sure we import that. And the width I'll do 100, and the height I'll do 200. And let's see how this kind of looks on the page. And one thing we'll have to do is, like, if there is no image, we don't want to actually try to display an image, right? So we'll have to say, make this conditional. If book image is defined, because some of these do not have an image, then we can just go ahead and like try to display it. Cool. So there it is. And we could probably, this looks a little squashed, so we could probably fix that. I think this needs to be like maybe 150, like this. All right, so we made some good changes. Let's just go ahead and commit what we have before we get carried away with making too many changes. And I will just go ahead and say, adding the ability to display images of books. So one thing you'll notice is that we don't have any like placeholder books here if the user hasn't uploaded a book or an admin hasn't come along and added a book yet. So I think it'd be good to have like a default book, and then later on someone can come back and fix it with a real image. And so let's go back to here. And if there is no image, what we're going to do is we're going to change this to a ternary. And we're just going to make a div here. And the div could have a same width and height as this above. So they kind of had the exact same layout. But we're going to go ahead and make this gray. And then, yeah, we'll put no image. So it looks like Cursor is helping us out there. And let's look at what it has. It looks like this, which Isn't too bad, but we can improve it, right? So we can just go ahead and say like this could have a flex, and we could say item center and justify center. So if you're new to Flexbox, what justify center does is it's going to, on the main axis, it'll center it like right in the center here. And then item center, if you're using just flex, that is going to center it horizontally and vertically, right? So it's going to be right in the middle of the page. So go back over here, you'll see that it shows up over there. And then it'd probably be also nice to add a icon. So we could do like a book icon. So maybe we have one already. We'll say book icon. Here we go. Luckily, when you install Shadcn, you have like a list of all these icons that already exist out of the box. And you can see it here. There's a book icon that says no image. And then we could change this to flex column to invert the axes so they look like this. And another really important thing I already mentioned is gap. And that'll space out the icon with the text. Okay, so now we have like a nicer looking page. But also, if you were to go and read the reviews on this book, notice that it crashes because we have to do something similar. So we're going to have to go back and go to this page. And same thing, we don't want to display this book unless it's defined. So we'll do that. And then we'll do ternary. And then we'll paste in our div. And we'll save this. Input the book icon. And we'll make these match. So this needs to be 200 width and 300 height. And there we go. There's no image. Although this is kind of squished. I don't know why this is so squished. I have it set to a width of 200 pixels. So the reason this is getting squished down is because by default, like Flexbox allows things to grow and shrink. And so if we don't want this thing to shrink down, just go over here and say flex shrink of 0, and that'll prevent it from shrinking. And then we'll have like a nice looking page over here. Okay, so one thing we can move on to as well is remember we have like this cool review section, which we could allow users to come in and write a review on a book. So I'm going to grab the existing review component, which will just be, I think, this whole card section. Might as well just grab all this. And then we'll go down and find a place to put that down here. So we'll have a card, and then we'll have another card right here. Let's just paste that in. And then we're going to have to import a couple of things. For example, a star icon. We should probably import that. Input. We need to install that from Shadcn, and I think also we're using a text area. So we'll say Shadcn add, and we'll say input in text area to make sure we get those two components added to our project. And then we can import that. Import this. And some of the stuff I'm just going to comment out for right now, and we'll come back and fix it. Definitely want to import the button, and then that can be commented out. And then on submitting, eventually we'll come in here and we'll add something. And then all the reviews, we don't have any reviews yet. Okay, so what we're going to start with, I know I just brought over a lot of code, but really what we did is we brought over a form. If we go back to the app and refresh, and if we look at the UI, we are getting an error, and that's because we're trying to do an on submit inside a server component. Remember, with Next.js, every component by default is a server component. And so now we're going to have to split some of the stuff up into smaller components, which again is going to make our code a little bit more maintainable. But I could just make a create, or I could say post review form.tsx, and we'll put use client at the top. So what this directive does is it tells Next.js that, hey, allow us to use traditional React hooks and, click events and stuff like that. And so we're going to find the form component, and we want to just copy this whole thing. In fact, not copy, we're going to cut it. And then we're going to say export function post review form. And then we want to return that stuff I just cut out. And then all the imports, we definitely need to grab those imports and put them at the top of this file. And now it should be good. We just need to import this component. So if I copy this component name and scroll down, we could just put it right here, I believe. I'll just go ahead and do that and save it. And now, hopefully, there we go. So now we have a card at the bottom, and we can actually start pasting our reviews, which is pretty cool because we can put our name, and we can also put like a review that someone can post in here. Let's go back to the post review forms. And in order to get the information before the code that was commented out, it was trying to track the information as it was changing. And so if we go back to v0, that's probably some stuff that we should try to bring over. It's literally just going to be a bunch of state. So like new review and set new review. So we can grab over that state, put it in this component right here and import useState. And then we can actually just like start uncommenting a little bit of stuff. So we'll uncomment that and this and this. So that's basically saying, hey, like when the user updates the input, go up here to this state and just modify some of this stuff. Same thing with the rating and the comments and the username. Okay, so now if we go back to the app, we should see the ability to like change the stuff, and it should be required now. So if they try to submit it without entering that information, it won't work. And by the way, I'm going to put a little bit of gap between these things. I think they're kind of squished. So if we go back to the main page here, what we could do is inside of this, I could say flex call, gap of 4, like Cursor's recommending, and that'll put a little bit of space between these. In fact, I'd probably even double this or make it 12, just so there's more space. Okay. What we want to do is when a user enters information in this form and submits it, we want to store that into the Wix Headless CMS. Now, we don't have a collection for storing this information yet. We should probably make one called reviews. Let's go back to Wix, and then I'm going to go over to the CMS, and I'm going to make a new collection called reviews. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this one from scratch this time. I'll say start from scratch, and I'll say reviews. All right, and then it's going to store multiple items. I'll say create. So we're going to add some things here. First of all, we're going to add a rating. So we want to do a number, and then we'll say rating and save that. And then we want to add a name. So I'll do text, and we'll say name. And then we also want to add a review. So this could be like a review. Cool, so now we have rating, name, and review. And now right now we can't delete title because this is the primary field. So I think if we wanted to, we could change the review over here to be the primary field, I guess. So we'll say make primary, and that'll allow us to go back and delete the title. Okay, there we go. And what we need to do is in the UI, when someone submits that form, they need to basically call some code that's going to insert a record into this reviews collection. Okay, so let's try to figure that out. Let's go over here. And when someone submits this form, this is where we're going to have to call that client library to try to submit the information. Okay, so on submit, we're going to say E, and we'll say e.prevent default. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say await client, and we'll import that from that Wix folder we have. And now we could say items dot, and then we'll say insert data item. And we could do a data collection ID, and this needs to be reviews. And then also for the data item, we could simply just put the new review information like this. Okay. Now, one thing that we should probably add in, which I didn't do, is that we need to reference the review with the book ID. Okay, so we definitely need to add in the book ID, which we'll have to figure that out in a bit. I think the book ID probably needs to be passed in here. So I'll say book ID, and then we'll just go ahead and type that as a string. Oh, actually, I think this needs to be data like this. There we go. That should make it happy. All right, so now we're going to store that review with a book ID, but let's go back to Wix because I totally forgot that you can actually have rows reference other collections, right? So this collection of reviews needs to reference the books. So I'm going to say it's a reference. The field name is going to be called book. I think I'll call it a book ID, and then we'll reference books over there, and I'll click save. And hopefully this works as I'd expect. So now what we could do is when this thing is created, it should store the book ID, and this should already be hooked up to reference the book that the review is for. So I'll go ahead and try to run this. So let's also make sure that the book ID is passed into this component. So let's go over here, and we're going to find book ID needs to be passed in like this. Okay. So a lot of changes. We added a form. Should be posting a review. Let's just go ahead and say Cody. I'll give this book 3 stars, and I'll say this book was boring. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and click on post review, and then we'll see what happens. So we got a little error saying system error occurred. And I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe the reason this is failing is because in order to insert data into a collection, you have to allow authentication. So we're going to go and click on more actions, and I'm going to say permissions and privacy. Now I do believe in order for people to be able to insert things, you have to go and click on custom. And then I want to say everyone can add and everyone can view. In terms of update and delete, we won't allow them to do either. Only an admin can do that. But let's save that and see if that allows us to actually post a review. So I'm going to try it again. I'll click post review and it failed again. I think it's because in Next.js, this client is actually trying to use a protected environment variable. So we're going to just go ahead and say next public here. I think the client ID is something that could be used in the front end too. And we're just going to refactor this to have a public client ID that can be used on both the server and the front end. So let's try this. Let's go back over here and I'll go ahead and click on this. And as you saw, it basically submitted the review. Go back over here, click reviews. Okay, and you can see we stored the wrong data. So one thing that's cool about Wix is that you can actually store fields that you haven't defined. So I just stored comment and user, but I probably should have done this with the proper casing. So like this should not be called comment and user. It should be called name. And this should be called review. Okay, so I kind of messed up the naming of those. So we'll go back over here and this will be called name. And this will be review. So a little human error there, but I think that should fix it up. And honestly, let's just delete this whole review and we'll try it again. So let's go back. I'll say Cody review. This book was boring. Go ahead and submit that. And that should have kicked off a submission. All right, and here is our review. You see the rating, we have the name, we have the review, and we have a reference to the book. So if I wanted to, I can actually change this to point to other books if I wanted to, and that's all nice. I can actually like go and look at the collection from this UI. Okay, so some little things I want to add in before I commit this code is after we submit the form, it would be nice to reset this state. So let's just make a constant up here. I'll say const initial review, and then we'll just go ahead and paste in that default state. And then we're going to use initial review here. And then after we have submitted the form, I can just say set new review equals to initial review. And that should clear out the state, which means the form will reset. And then if I were to go back and just test it out, so just type in some information, click on post, that all gets cleared out. Also, we'll check that the rating gets reset too. Awesome. Now, one thing I like to add into my applications if you're using Shadcn is some type of feedback. Like, although the form cleared out and we got that feedback, it would be nice if we added in like a toast. So let's go to Shadcn. And this is what the toast kind of looks like. If I go ahead and load this up, you'll see a toast at the bottom that pops up. And that is what I want to add in. So let's just run Shadcn to add it. And then we are going to follow the guide. Basically on the layout, you add a toaster. Let's go to layout. You import the toaster up here, and then you just need to display it somewhere on this body. And once that's been displayed, I believe all you need to do is you can say const toast is equal to use toast, like this. And now I could go ahead and after we've successfully submitted it, I could say toast, and then we can put a, scroll down and look at the docs. Looks like this. We'll paste that in, and this will be your review has been posted. And then maybe for a description, thank you for your feedback. That's probably good. All right, let's try it again. Let's go to the UI and just type in some stuff. Click post review. And there we have it. Your review has been posted. Now, some more feedback is when a user clicks on post, there is like a ½ second delay. So adding some type of spinner and disabling the button would be probably some good polish to add to the application. Pretty easy to do. So we'll just go ahead and right here, I'll say like const is loading. And then we'll make sure that we set this to true when we're loading. And then finally, we could just add a finally here. We could say is loading is false. Okay. And then actually, I think it'd make more sense to, instead of awaiting on this, Technically, I kind of like promise chaining sometimes, but we're going to go ahead and just catch any errors if they happen. And we're going to go ahead and just set, if it's successful, we'll do this. And if there's an error, we will just show a toast that has an error. Now, with Shadcn, you can actually add a variant here. So we can say do a destructive variant. So that'll be like a red toast, just in case when we try to submit the Wix, if something went wrong, it'll show a red toast. And then finally, for the is loading, let's just scroll down. And on the button itself, I'm going to say disable the button if this thing is loading. And then also, we could put a spinner. So let's just show a spinner here. Do I have a spinner? I could do loader 2. Okay, so this is basically, if the thing is loading, show a loader icon with like an animation spin. Otherwise, don't show anything. And then we'll say post review. And then one thing I'll do is I'll put some space between it. So I could say like class is flex. And I'll say item center gap of 2. And just delete that. All right, let's try it again. Go back over here. I'll click post review. You saw the spinner. You saw it disable. We see this. Awesome. So that looks a lot better. I think gap of 1 would be better, honestly. And then the margin right stuff can go away. All right, let's submit what we have because we made a lot of changes. So I'm going to go ahead and just add all this stuff. And I'll say adding the ability to post a review. Submit that. All right, so now it's time to actually show the reviews because previously, I think we have all that code commented out. So if we were to go back to our page, which is this one, go down to the code that we commented out. So here we're looping over all the reviews and we had it commented out, but now we should actually fetch that information. And so in order to do that, again, we're going to use that Wix API over here. And I'll say const data reviews. I'll say await client.items.get. Actually, we'll say query data items. This is very similar to how we did it on the other page. And this will be a data collection ID is going to be reviews. And instead of doing a find, we'll do a equals. And so we can say find where the book ID is equal to the book ID. And then I think we have to run find to actually like execute the query. And then over here, I think we can just do a .then. And I can say like response. And then we're going to get back the items. And again, we're going to map and we'll do like an item.data. Okay, so this should be, in fact, I could just change this to reviews. This should be all the reviews that are associated with this book ID. All right, so now we got the book, and then we also have all the reviews for the book. And you could wrap this in a promise all, so you can kind of concurrently fetch these. We might do that in a bit, but let's just try to fix up the UI. So we're going to map over every review. And for the review itself, we have the ID of the review. We have the name of who reviewed. We have the rating, and then we could bring in the star icon, and then we have a review. Okay, so let's look at the UI now, and we can see all those reviews popping up now, which is great. So now I think it'd be good to add a header because it's hard to get back to like the dashboard to see all the books. So let's go back to the layout, and we want to add like a header component in the app. I'll just say like header.tsx. And I'll say use client, and I'll say export function header. And inside the layout itself, above the children, I'll just bring in that header component. And then here we go, we got the header. And we can make a really, really basic header by just going over here. And we could just put a class name on this. And we'll say like BG gray of 100, and I'll say border bottom. That should be good enough. And then in the header itself, we could do a container. And we can say MX auto. And then we'll say like logo, like this. And let's just make sure this shows up. Okay, so here's our header. Probably make it a little bit bigger. So like on the header itself, we could say padding Y of 6 maybe, and see how that looks. All right. And now typically with a header, you need like, a couple of things. You need like your logo, which we could do a div here for the logo. And then you need some links. So we'll just do a div for the links. And we also need like a div for the account stuff. So we could do like a login, assuming that we'll add in a login in a second. But so the thing I'm trying to do right now is just like, I need a link. I need a link to the books page. So I'm going to say books like this, and then we want to import that from the next link. And now if I were to look at the UI, we can click on books to get back to the main books. But what we should probably do here is give this a flex, and then we want to make all the items spaced out. So I'm going to say justify between item center, and this should also space this stuff out. On the link itself, like we should probably add some styling here. So I could say class name, and then I'll say like text blue 200, hover text blue 300. So at least people can like see that it's a link. That's a little bit dark. We should probably make that a little bit darker, and I'll say cursor. Okay, so now we can actually click books to go and see all the books. But one thing we could also do is add a little back button here, which is kind of a nice little thing you can add to a page. So inside of the book page, near the top, just add like a little chevron left. And then we'll import this. And then over here, we'll add like a div. And then here we'll add a link. That'll go back to the books like this. And then we'll just say back to the books. Yeah, looks pretty good, but we just need to kind of like center it as well. So let's just go ahead and just center that. And there we go. We can go back to books. Okay, and then also like when you hover over it, it should probably look like a link. So again, we could say like text blue 600, hover text blue of like 700. Okay, so it looks like a link now. But the issue is if you click on anywhere in this row, it takes you back. That's not what we wanted. So we should probably wrap this in a button. So I'll just say like button, and then we will just give this, if I import this, there's different variants you can give this. You can give this a variant of a link. And then you don't even have to like style that, but just make sure you put as child here. And that should now look like a link. Okay, so some more things we could do. In the header, instead of logo, I could say like the book club. That sounds good. Here's the book club, and then also this should probably be a button that you can click to take you back to the home page, which we don't really have a landing page yet, but we could just do that anyway. So I'll change this to be a link, and that'll take us to the home page. And this could be a button that's a variant link like this, just so that it has like the styling. So now I can click on it and go back to the home page, and then I can go back to books. And I think books as well, maybe we should make that a button. So I'll just go ahead and say that's a button, say as child, variant, a link. And then I can kind of get rid of this styling we added. I don't know why I was adding that, honestly. On this page, I think having this be on the top left would be a little cleaner. Let's go back to this page and let's find where we're doing that. I think this has like a justify item center. I'm actually going to get rid of like all this stuff because I don't think we need any of this stuff. And now what we could do is actually just refactor this a little bit, make it a container to match the other layout. And now we have books here. And then if we want to put a little bit of space between these, I would just do a space Y. So space Y of 12, and that should space them out. There we go. And even that might be a little bit too much. Let's do like 8 instead. So I think it'd be worth trying to do a little bit of searching. So like, let's say there's a bunch of books. We could add an input box here in a search button that would allow you to search over the books by title, maybe some other things as well. So let's go to this section. And we're going to go ahead and just put this in a flex so that we can put a search box here. So I'll do a form, and inside that form we want to input, and then probably a button that says search. I want to make sure I import that. Then we'll go back and look at what this looks like. So search books. We want to get this on the same line. So again, flex is the way we can do that. So just give it a flex and a gap. Okay. And then we want to center this whole thing more in the center of the page. So what we could potentially do is here we're going to say justify between item center. There you go. And I'm going to add this add book button to the top so it's more visible. So let's find the add book. I'm going to move it to the top so it's also in that row. And now we should have 3 different ways. So add book, we can search, and then this is just like the books page that we're on. So how do we do this? So basically when I do a search, I want to change the URL up here to do like a search by a title or something. So if we look at this page, this is a server component. And so we'll have to basically say action, and then we could say async use server. This is something that's built in the Next.js where you can add a use server directly inside of a function if you want to. And this is a server action. So all we want to do here is based on what they searched in, we can get the form data, and then the search field will come over in the form data, and we can just say redirect to the same page, but then put in that search field in the URL. So let's just import this from Next Navigate. And what I'm doing here is if I were to search in like, I don't know, Gatsby and click search, notice that it does redirect the URL, although it's doing search of null. So I think this doesn't line up. I think we need to say name is search. And now it should work. So if I do it, it'll say Gatsby up there. Okay, so if someone were to search Gatsby, we want to search Wix to find all of the records that match the keyword Gatsby. So the way we can achieve this is when this page loads, we're going to get some props for the search fields if there are any. So we could just go ahead and say like, yeah, let's bring in search params. And search could potentially be undefined, so we want to make sure we put a question mark there. And instead of doing a find, which is going to give us back everything from the collection. Now, if you look at the Wix docs, they have a couple ways you can do this. There's a starts with, so you can search a certain property to see if it starts with a certain subset. They also have an equals. So if you have an exact match you want to do, you can do an equals. And they also have an in. So I think for our case, let's just do starts with. I don't think they have like a fuzzy search, but starts with should be good enough. So we'll just go over here and say dot starts with, and then we want to check where the title starts with the search params dot search. And if it's not defined, then we'll do just nothing, and that should still just return everything. So now if we go back to the app, type in the great and click search. All right, there we go. And then we can get back everything. So super easy to add in search. I mean, that took like no time at all, but definitely check out all the other ones. I think in could be very useful if you wanted to do tags. So if we wanted to tag books by genre, which we do have, that could be something that we add in. But one thing I noticed, if you were to search something that doesn't exist, I mean, we just get back nothing here, which not the best experience. So I think what we could do is if we don't have any books, we'll just go ahead and say if the books.length is equal to 0, then we should probably display like a placeholder. Okay, it's like no books found would be probably a good thing to start with at least. But what I like to do is I want to add an actual placeholder image. So my go-to is Undraw, where they have a nice bunch of different like illustrations you can actually use. And we're going to change this to black color over here. I'll do search and I'll say not found. Okay, and so I think just saying like no data could be a good one. I'm going to download the SVG and then I'll put that in the project public folder. All right, so I added it to the public folder, which hopefully I put in the right place. But what we could do is we'll just add an image like this, and I'm going to put it above the book not found. And this will be an image location of /not found SVG. Book not found icon could be the alt. And then, yeah, let's just do 200 by 200 and see if this shows up. Let's go back to the app. And it doesn't look like it's showing up. So did I name it wrong? Not found SVG. Inside the public folder. I do wonder if public folder needs to be at the root, actually. I think it needs to be at the root of the entire thing. Let's try this. Save it, and there it is. Okay. So yeah, I'm going to center this and also put this around a grid. So let's just go ahead and say name, border, padding of 12, and then we could just center everything like this. And then I want to move this out. I don't want this to exist in the grid. I want this to be above the grid. So we can do this. And here we go. It says no books found. So again, we could type in the, and we should get back some results. Someone types in something bogus. We'll get nothing. Very nice. Okay, let's just go ahead and commit what I have here. I'm going to say adding the ability to search over books using Wix Search SDK. And I'll sync that up. So one thing we didn't add in was the ability for users to add in their own books. Like let's say there's a book that's not in this list. It'd be nice if a user can just add a book. So we're going to go to that add book button, which let's find where that was here. And what we need to do is show a dialog that has a form in it. So Shadcn has a great way to do this. In fact, I mean, you could probably just use v0. So let's go to Shadcn. They have a component called the dialog component. There is an alert dialog that's different. So let's just go to dialog. This is kind of what it looks like. Here's a good example that we can actually just copy. So let's install the dialog. So let's go over here and just install it. And then while that's installing, I'm going to go ahead and just copy all this code. And then we're going to go back, and inside this books folder, I'm going to say add book dialog.tsx. We'll say use client, and we'll paste in the imports. And then we're also going to just export a function that has all that code. Okay. And then we're going to put this button in it. So for the trigger, this is typically in Shadcn how you have the dialog open and close. There's like a trigger. You can simply just put a button in here. And then in the trigger, you can say as child. So it can actually like work. And then we just need to add it to our page. So like in the same location that we used to do the button, just add the dialog. And then look at this. We have a dialog that pops up for us. But in this dialog itself, this is where we can actually like put the form. And so add a new book could be the title here. And then for the description, we just say, if you didn't find a book you are looking for, add one here. And then we just go ahead and fix some of those ESLint errors. And this over here in the dialog content, we'll just add a form. And inside the form, we're going to add in the same fields that we need, like the title, the author, the ISBN, and a submit button. So we'll use cursor, just let that kind of add in those things. And it'd be nice if those have fields though. I think they were missing field descriptions. So over here, I think if we go to input, typically there's like a form field that we want. So for example, this. So we'll go and add in a label, which we might have to import. I don't know if we have a label yet, but here's like an example of how you can do that. So we're going to go over here and try to see if we have a label. We don't. So we'll have to go and just add it. But we know how to do that. Super simple. And now that's done, we can just import the label. And then we're going to go ahead and just put a title here. So this will be title and type text. Okay, and we'll do the same thing for author. So like we'll do the same thing here. Author, ISBN. Okay, there, that looks good. Okay, just let AI do the busy work for you. Like it's not worth like wasting a bunch of time like typing all this stuff out. So we just want to put a little bit gap between this stuff. And then probably also make them all required. So here I could say class name and we put some gap. There we go, looks pretty good. And then also the max width stuff, get rid of that. We want this to be full width. And then honestly, I don't think the ISBN is that important. Like we could just make it optional. But the other ones, author and title, like those definitely are important. So we'll say required. And now you can't submit this form until you fill out the author and the title. And then when you click submit, we need to basically contact Wix CMS to do the stuff they were doing before. So let's, on the form itself, again, we could say on submit, like this, and we'll say e.prevent default. And then what we need to do is get all the form data like we did before. And then we just basically need to say client, and we'll say items dot, I think it was called insert data item. Okay. And then the collection item ID would be books. And then the data item would be data. And then we basically just need to put those fields. Okay. It's as simple as that, right? And then when the data item is created, we could potentially redirect the user to the book that they just added. Or we could just refresh the list under the hood. I think I'll just redirect the user. So like we can get the item back, And then in Next.js, you have this router that you can bring in. So I'll say use router, and we want to import that from Next Navigation. And let's go and just, after we get the item created, we can say router dot push, and then we want to go to the actual item we just created. Now, I don't know what this item response actually has on it. Let's print out this. Let's just print it out and see. I don't know what's on this, but if we were to go click add book, type some stuff in, go to our console over here, and just clear this out and click add book. Let's see, we get back 404 not found. The book collection does not exist. You cannot work with the collection using the data API before creating it in the editor. So for some reason it thinks that books doesn't exist, and that's because it's capital B. This is case sensitive. So let's try it again. Run it, and I'm getting a 403 forbidden. Again, this is because in Wix, you have to go to your collection and you have to enable permission and security. So I'll have to go and say allow anyone to add stuff in. Also, anyone can read stuff. So we'll save that. And now we should be able to quickly just add that book in. And I think it worked, but we got back undefined here. So let's see what the response is, because I'm not sure what data item.id. Okay, that's what we need. So when you call this, you get back a response that has a data item on it. And it should be defined, but I guess if it's not defined, we could just say like, I'll just put a question mark here. And let's try it again. Let's just type in book information, click add book, and then that'll take us directly to the book after it's been added. Now I did notice that there was some information missing. So title and author, testing, I'll just say author of Cody. I'll try it again, add the book and see what, yeah, it's just not, I don't think the information is being stored correctly. So let's go back to Wix. Yeah, so these aren't being set because I totally forgot to add names here. These need to be names. So name equals to title, author, ISBN. Okay. All right, let's try this again. I'm going to go ahead and just delete those 3 records because those don't have the data we want. And then we'll go back here and let's go back to the books, add a book. I'll say testing Cody ABCD or whatever. I'll submit it. And there we actually have the title coming back and the author. So that's working good now. So we also should probably add the description. And at some point we may be adding in too many things into a modal or a dialog. You'd have to use your best judgment. I mean, you could add a scroll bar in here so you can put more content. Right now we'll keep it in the dialog, but I think we're crossing the threshold of like too much data in a dialog. So we'll say text area, and then we'll say description, that, delete that stuff. Make sure description shows up now. It does. And we can go up here and also pass in description. So we'll say like description, like that. Make sure we pass it in. And now we should be able to also store the description. Okay, and that's showing up. Okay, I'm going to go through and just update these images so it just looks a little nicer as we're like doing stuff. So let's just upload, again, from my computer. I have a bunch of images, 1884, Mocking, Pride and Prejudice. Let's upload those, and then I can simply just select, what am I doing right now? Kill a Mockingbird, do that one. 1884, we'll do that one. And then Catcher in the Rye, we'll do that one as well. Just so that like when we're playing around with this UI, it looks like there's real books there, because right now it's just kind of looking plain. Cool, so we have some books, and then additionally, I don't like how it says create next app at the top here. Let's go to the layout, and there should be like a metadata section, and then instead we'll say like the book club. And I'll say a place to find and review books. There we go. And then also I want to add an icon here. I just want to make this look a little bit more professional. Okay, so I added one called book. If you look at this real quick, it's just, you know, a basic little book like that, a little cute little book. And then what we could do is inside of here, we could say image. And we'll say source is equal to /book JPEG. And then the width could be like 40 pixels. And then we can have an alt that just says the book club. And then we probably need to space this out a little bit. So we'll just say class name, and then we'll put a little bit of gap. You know, I forgot to remove the background on it. So like, let's go and just change this to a PNG. I removed the background, and there we go. Okay, another thing, I like adding like at least a custom font to some of these things. So like, the cool thing about Next.js is that they have fonts. All you need to do is just go to layout, and then up here you'll see that they have like some fonts that you can just import. And let's just go ahead and say import dancing font from Next fonts. And that should just import dancing script. This is a nice cursive one that we could use. And then what we need to do is over here in the class names, we just need to interpolate that variable. The way you can apply the font is basically say font and then font family name. You can do a CSS variable here and just pass in that variable that we defined in the layout, which would be font dancing script. You could also import this in the tailwind to make it a little bit easier to use. But now it says the book club. It looks, you know, a little bit better. Let's just go ahead and make this a little larger. 2XL, see how big that is. All right, so we got a quaint little book review site where people can upload books. And also, there's a lot of primary buttons going on here. I think there's too many primary buttons. Some of these things I would probably recommend changing. I like using primaries for actions that like are creating. And then I use secondary for the actions that are just like searching or something. So if we go and find the search button here, we can add a variant. I could say variant.secondary, and then that'll change it to be a button that kind of looks like that. And I could do the same thing for the read reviews. So let's find read reviews. Again, I could say variant secondary, just so they're not as like in your face, because there's like a lot of bright contrasting buttons. And then logging in. That could be an outline. So let's find header, find login, and this could be a variant of outline. There we go. Okay, so you have different options when it comes to Shadcn of like the styling of the buttons. And we made a lot of little changes. So let's just go ahead and commit what we have. I'll just say like adding a logo and cursive font. Also add a book dialog. Made all that up. Okay, so as of right now, everyone who has been uploading data, it's been associated to like an anonymous OAuth user. Okay, so they can't come back and like really edit this stuff if they ever be on a... So they can't really track anything. Like they can't track the reviews that they've made. They can't track the books that they've uploaded. And it would be cool if a user could actually authenticate with Wix's OAuth provider and do a Google login, and then get like a unique ID when they're logged in. So that's what we're going to try to do. It's going to be a little bit involved, but I think having ability to do real authentication will just take this little application to the next level. And so on this login button, we're going to go and find the login button. Okay, here it is. Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to wrap this in a form like this, and then we're going to give this an action where we can actually invoke a server action. So I'm going to make an actions.ts file. And inside of this, I'm going to put use server at the top. This is important because it tells Next.js that every function that's exported in this file is like a publicly accessible endpoint for the remote procedure call. And then we could just make a function called export async function login. I like to suffix my stuff with action. So to get this set up, what we need to do is we need to initiate a whole OAuth flow. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say const data is equal to await client, and make sure we import this, auth.generate OAuth data. So we need to create some data that we're going to store in either our user's browser, or we can store in a cookie. In our case, we're doing this in a server action, so we can store it in a cookie. But we need to pass it a callback URL. So I'm going to go ahead and just say next public URL. And then we're going to say login callback. Okay, so this is like the URL that when we try to log into Wix, it's going to redirect us back to a page called login callback. And in order to get this working, we actually have to go and specify this over here. We can just put localhost in our .env file. And then the second thing we're going to do is just put process.env.next public URL. This is the origin. It's optional. I don't know if you really need to paste it in, but it works when I did it. So we're going to add it in. And so we get back this data. And what you can do with data is you can store it somewhere. So in our case, we're going to store it in cookies. So we're going to bring in next headers, and then we're going to say set. We'll say OAuth redirect data. And then we're going to stringify this. So we'll say JSON stringify, and then we're going to pass in that data. So this is going to store a cookie on the user's browser because we need to use this data later on to verify that the redirect was valid. And then we need to basically get the auth URL. So we'll say await client.auth. And we'll say get auth URL. And then we need to pass in that data. And then we're just going to redirect the user to that auth URL. And redirect is also a next method. Okay, so let's make sure we call the login action here and import this. And there is one other step that we have to do to like set this up, and that is basically inside of our project settings. Let's go to settings here for the site. We have to go to our OAuth app. Let's go to the headless settings, and let's go to our client, and let's go to settings. And down here, we didn't set up the URLs, but we need to say HTTP localhost 3000. And then we also need to add an HTTP localhost 3000 login callback. Okay, so this is what you need to tell Wix so that it knows to redirect properly to your app. And so we'll save that. And I do believe before this will work, we have to go into Wix site and we have to at least publish our site, which I think my head might be hiding. So let me just hide my head real quick. I'm going to go ahead and just publish this site real quick so that we have a real domain that the user can try to authenticate with. And then this should finish up here in a second. Okay, that's all done. And now let's try this out. So if we go back to our app, we should be able to click a login button and hopefully it'll take us to the Wix login page. Okay, so now we're logging in. Notice that we're at Wix Studio IO. That's our client, or that's our project. And now we can log in with Google. But before we do that, we have to make a endpoint to basically handle the callback. So remember, we have this login callback. We have to make a route called login callback. And in our case, we're going to make a page.tsx here. And what this page is going to do is we're actually just going to do a use effect. We'll do a login callback page, and we want to basically say use effect. And when the page mounts, we will have some information in the URL that we need. So I'm going to get the URL over here, and then we're going to say window.location.href. And then we're actually going to pass this URL to an action. So I'm going to go ahead and make an actions here. Now I am just going to paste in code, and we'll talk about the code. I just don't have to code all this out live for you all. Basically what happens is when this page loads, we want to pass in the URL, which happens to have some information on it, so that we can properly do the OAuth authentication. And if everything goes well, we need to redirect the user back to like the home page. So I'm going to say const router is equal to use router. And then we'll just go ahead and say like, then router.push, go to the home page. Okay. And then down here, what we'll do is we'll add a loader. And then we just want to show like a loading state while it's trying to authenticate. But the main thing I want to point out is that it's calling the server action here. And so we're passing in the URL mainly because Wix is sending back a hash symbol with some data embedded in it, which isn't available server side. So we have to basically capture that on the client side and then redirect by basically calling a server action. And what's going on here is we parse that URL. So client.auth.parse from URL. That gives us back the OAuth data. And then we check the cookie. Remember we set a cookie for some data prior? Well, now we're going to check the cookie. And then we basically parse the cookie down here. And then we compare the code and the state that Wix is sending us in that URL against the code and state that we stored inside of our cookie. And if everything's good, we'll get back a refresh and an access token, which we then store in a session. And so the session cookie is what's going to have the information about like who the user is and how long they have access to the app. Now, the last thing we're going to have to do to get this working is that now when we create the client, we're going to have to check to see if a cookie is set. So I'm going to go ahead and just pass in tokens. And then we are going to pass in json.parse of cookies.get. And then this will be null. All right, so this should hopefully work. Now that we have the callback endpoint, we'll debug this if it doesn't work, but let's just go ahead and click on login, and that'll allow us to select a login with email. So I'll go ahead and click on this one, and then Wix is going to redirect us back to our login callback endpoint. Notice here in the URL, there's a hash symbol code and a state. So these are the things that we basically have to pass to our server action. The server action validates those. Now we are getting a little next issue. And so I think what we'll have to do is instead of just exporting a client, we actually want to export a function. So we could just say export function get client like this. And then that could simply just return this client instead. All right, and we'll have to like do some refactoring in our code base to get this working. Because I think we're doing client dot in a couple of places. So instead of just doing client dot, we'll do get client. Okay, and this won't take too long to refactor. I mean, we're just doing it in a couple places. All right, so all throughout the code base has been refactored away. So another issue that we're running into is that because of Next.js, it's a little bit complicated. Certain files can only run in the front end of the back end. And so it's saying you're importing a component that needs Next headers that only works in server components, but we're importing get client from many different client components, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just copy this file, and I'm going to say Wix client. And then I'm going to call this get server client so that I know that this should only ever run in Next. And then I'm going to move this out. And then over here with the Wix client, this will be called just get client. And so now we're going to go and just do a little bit more refactoring. Okay, this will be called get server client. And then down here, we'll have to import that from the client one. Okay, so again, like if it's a client component, we need to use get client. And if it's a server component, we have to use get server client. So here, like this would definitely be a get server client, because this is running on the back end. This would also be get server client. And then of course, instead of getting the cookies from Next.js, we actually need to bring in a cookie library. And so for the Wix client, instead of grabbing the cookies from the Next headers, I actually want to bring in something called JS cookie. So we could just import JS cookie over here. This is a library that just helps dealing with cookies, makes it a little bit easier. And so I'll say import cookies from cookies.js. I think that's what it's called, cookies.js. Oh no, it's called JS cookie, my bad. And then instead of saying cookies over here, we'll just say cookies dot. We could also install the types. I think it's missing the types. So now we can say cookies dot, and they'll say get, and then we can just simply get the session here like this, and then default it to null if it's not defined. Okay, so again, like I mentioned, getting the OAuth setup would be a little bit complex, but I think the moment we get this going, like it'd be pretty nice. You're importing a component that needs to use effect. So login callback. Oh, I think login callback. This needs a use client at the top. Forgot to add that. Use client. And then we should be good. Okay, so I think it's working. We just need to dynamically change this to a logout button if we're already logged in. So let's go to the header and let's find login. And now what we're going to do is we're going to add in a logout button. So we're going to dynamically figure out if we are logged in or not. And the way we can do that is we can get the client. So I'm going to say const client equals get client over here. And then down here, we could simply say if client.auth.is, I think it's just called logged in, then we can show like a login button or a logout button. So if we are logged in, we should probably show like a logout button. So in fact, I'll just do a form, and then this will say logout, and this will call an action called logout action. So right next to the login action, we can just go ahead and put a logout action. And again, we're going to get the server client, and we're just going to revalidate the path after the user has logged out so the header can refresh. And I'm also going to add that here after you log in. And what the logout is doing is basically calling client auth logout. And then, actually this needs to be URL. And then it deletes the cookie. Because remember, when we logged in, we set a session cookie. So now we're just going to delete it when you log out. All right, let's import the logout action, and then also, this is a method, so I think we got to call it. And then in the header, actually, I'm going to get rid of the use client at the top of this, and I'm just going to import get client from the server one. So I'll just say get server client, and then we're going to check to see if the user is logged in. All right, so you can see on the right that we are currently logged in. And so I wanted to show, if I go to browse books and I try to add a book, I'll just say like testing Cody again, and then we'll say add book. This is actually going to be associated with my currently logged in users. And the way you can tell that is if I go over here and console log the books, go ahead and console log the books here, and then type in testing. I want to show you that in the console log that comes back, we'll actually get an owner now. So there's an owner ID here, and that ID actually happens to match the user that we're currently logged in with. And so since we have an owner of the file, what we can actually do is bring in yet another package called Wix members. So I'm going to go ahead and just install npm install @wix/members. And while that's installing, what we could do is just bring in that package here. And we're going to add that as a module dependency. Now, right now it's only in the backend code. I think we might also have to add an authorization. I'm not too sure, but so now that we have that added, we can actually add another function here called like export function get member. And then we are going to get the client like this. And then we can look up the current member by calling this method. I will make this async. And then we will return it. So you'll see here we get back the member login email, the nickname, and the slug. And so let's just try to display the member nickname in the header. So if we are logged in here, we can just go ahead and wrap this in a div. And we could put this in a paragraph that says like, hello, get member nickname. That should probably be good. And then I'm going to import this. I mean, we do need to wait on it, so maybe it'd be better to just do it up here. Okay, and so if we're logged in, we could just display the member nickname. Okay, so you'll see at the top it says hello, and then it says my name, which is pretty cool. So let's just go ahead and just flex gap that. And then what we can also display is the ID. So remember, there's an ID here, and that starts with 04113. And we need to check to see if the data that's coming back right here. So Cody again, author 04113. So now we can get the actual owner ID and do queries based on that. Let me change this back to nickname. And all right, so what do we mean by that? Let's say you wanted to display all the reviews that you have done in this system. We could simply just put a your reviews link here in the header and have a different page to do a query against Wix. And I'll kind of show that. I don't think I'll add the functionality in for that. Just to show that, let's do like a reviews page. And then I'll say page.tsx. And we will just grab an existing page that we're like calling some Wix stuff with. And I'm going to delete a majority of all this code. And then I'll call that reviews page. And so instead of querying for books, we will do reviews, and then I'll say reviews here. And then we basically want to find where the owner ID is equal to the member ID. So we'll have to get the member like this, and then import that. And then hopefully, there is no member, that we'll have to like throw an exception or redirect. Okay, so here's what the final code looks like. Basically, fetch the member. If there is no member, we redirect. And then we can use that member ID to look up all the reviews that are by a particular owner and then log them. So right now, I don't think this user would have any. So like if I go to /reviews, it'd probably not get any back, right? So right now it's an empty array, which you can see down here. But if I were to go to a book, let's just go here to read reviews. And I'm going to paste one and say post reviews, and then go back to that reviews page. Oh, it needs to be owner. Let's try this again. There we go. So now we get the review back. So what we just did is we have a way to associate these records with logged in users. And a cool thing about that is we can actually go and change permissions based on if you're an owner. So like if I were to go to permissions and privacy for the reviews, I can actually say that only members are allowed to review stuff. So technically I could say only members can review, and then I can save that, and it's going to basically say, hey, you have to be logged in to be able to post a book or to add a review to a book. And we won't add that for now, but I just wanted to kind of point that out, that you can do that. So now that we have the reviews, we might as well just display them, right? So let's just go ahead and say like reviews.map, and then we could just go ahead and say for every review, we will just try to display them. We will display the review and the rating, and then that review will pop up over here. All right, so let's just say your reviews, and we're going to add like some delete functionality here because I think that'll be nice. So your reviews, that should pop up. Give this a little bit of class. We'll make this a little larger, and then we're going to style those reviews. So like if we go back to books, here we had the reviews down at the bottom. So if we go to the books page where we have like the reviews going on, I think that was like more at the bottom. We could grab that same styling, and then we can use it here instead. Just need to change a little bit of stuff. Okay, star icon. Okay, so this is a review that user posted, and I think adding a delete button could be useful. So I could just like, as a user, if I own this review, I can just delete it. Like maybe I didn't like the review I posted, or it was like a little bit too harsh. What we could do is just add that maybe underneath the stars. So over here, I'll just put a button that says delete. And let's see where this shows up. Okay, so right here, if the user were to click this, we could then make another request to Wix to delete the item. And again, because of the permissions we have, only an owner of that should be able to delete it. We'll have to go back to there and add that. So let's go back to reviews, and I'll go permissions and privacy. And I'll say the item creator only can delete that. So I'll just go ahead and save that. And then we need to add the functionality for deleting. So I'll just say on click, and then I'm going to wrap this button in a form, and then I'll say action. And then we could simply just do this for right now. And then the way we can delete it again is we'll say await. So we'll say get server client.items.remove data item. And then we need to pass in the ID. So in our case, I think it's just review /.id. And then we should probably just refresh the page. So I think we can just redirect back to reviews. And that should, actually we can say revalidate path. And that should hopefully refetch the reviews. Let's try this out. We're here. If I click on delete, that should delete it. And it says collection name must be a string. So I think I forgot to pass in the data collection, and that should be reviews. Let's try it again. If I click it, the review is now gone. And if I go back to Wix, that review will also be gone from this view. I might as well just add in a section here so I can view all the reviews. And like before, it's nice to add some placeholder. So let's add down here, I guess if the reviews.length is nothing, we could just do a similar placeholder like we did for the books. So we'll grab this, and then we'll paste this in, and we'll say, you have not reviewed any books yet. Have not. Cool. And then also in the header, we should probably add something to go to that page. So over here, I will add a link to reviews. And then if I click it, it should take me to reviews, not to books. Okay. And again, this should only show if you are logged in. If you're not logged in, then yeah, like, why would you be able to leave reviews, right? So we can go back and we can conditionally show this to say only show this if we are logged in. So again, we could just do something like this. The const is logged in is equal to await this. And then we could just use that here. And then also we could just use it here and wrap that. And then also if you try to hit this URL and you're not logged in, we should probably redirect them back. So let's go back to the reviews page, and we will just, oh, we already have that. So if the member is not defined, we redirect back to the home page or something. Yeah, so I think this should be good. Let's just test it out. Let's click on logout, just make sure that it kicks us back to the home page. I think there's a little bug with the get member function. I think this actually needs to say if we're not logged in, like we should just return undefined. I think that's causing it to crash. Okay, there we go. All right, so now we can log in again. Let's go to Browse Books, and let's check out To Kill a Mockingbird. We're going to go over here. We'll say testing. I don't know. I didn't watch it. And then post a review. And then I should be able to go back to my reviews page, and it shows up. All right, so I think that's as far as I'm going to take this tutorial. We learned a lot about Wix and how you can use their headless CMS to basically store items inside of a collection. And you can actually use OAuth so that users can log in, and you can assign permissions to the collections that only allow certain types of users to add and delete and modify records. We talked about how to upload images and how to attach those to data records. And we also talked about relationships. So we have like a book has reviews and can have many reviews. And all those reviews can belong to either authenticated users or anonymous users as well. We have the ability to search over books. So if I do the search there, it shows up. And I mean, if you watched the tutorial, you know what we did. Now I have done one other video with Wix, and that was for building out a UI using their nice Wix Studio editor. But this one again was focused on the headless CMS. But like you saw, the headless CMS is also very powerful as well. I mean, you can like basically get a database and not have to set it up yourself and not have to manage it yourself. You can just store whatever records you want and have some permissions over them, which is cool. So I recommend go check out Wix. It's a really cool service. They have a lot of features. I only scratched the surface of what they provide, but go check them out. And like always, the code will be in the Git repo that I created, and I'll put a link in the description. All right, have a good day. Happy coding.